The ocean stretched endlessly before us, the moonlight shimmering off its restless waves. I took a sip of my beer, feeling the salt on my lips, the cool night breeze slipping through my loose curls. Beside me, Jordan stretched his long legs out in the sand, his stylish sneakers half buried. His head tilted back as he took a slow drink. Man, nothing beats this, he sighed, eyes closed, body loose and comfortable beside me. I smiled, watching him from the corner of my eye. He was right. Nights like these, just the two of us by the water, laughing, talking about nothing and everything. It was our thing. You sound like an old man already, I teased. He grinned, tilting his head toward me. And you sound like you want to fight. I laughed, shaking my head. Boy, please. You know I could take you. Jordan scoffed, stretching his arms over his broad chest, flashing a cocky smile. In what world? I nudged his arm with my elbow, and he laughed, a deep, rich sound that had always been my favorite. Jordan had been my whole world since the day he was born. It had always been just us. No husband. No father in the picture. Just Cassie and Jordan, a team. You know, he mused, gazing out at the water. I tell my friends how cool my mom is, and they never believe me. Well, you better tell them to get their facts straight, I quipped. He smirked. I try. But they think I'm making it up. That no mom knows about all the stuff we talk about. I lifted a brow. You mean they don't talk to their moms about that kind of stuff? Apparently not. I took another sip of my beer, grinning. Well, maybe their moms just aren't as awesome as me. Jordan chuckled. But there was something else there. A softness in his expression, something thoughtful. He looked at me for a long moment, as if measuring his words. You ever feel like people just don't get us? He asked. I blinked, caught off guard by the shift in his tone. What do you mean? Jordan ran a hand through his hair, glancing away for a second. I mean, I see how other moms and sons are. It's different. They're all awkward, distant. They don't joke around like us. They don't just chill like this. He paused, picking at the label on his beer bottle. I think some people don't know what to make of it. I let his words settle. He wasn't wrong. People had always made comments. How young I acted, how unusual. It was that Jordan told me everything. But that was just us. I never wanted him to feel like he had to hide parts of himself. I wanted him to know I'd always understand no matter what. So, I finally said, shrugging, people don't get a lot of things. Doesn't mean we gotta change for them. Jordan smiled a little, but his eyes still held that quiet thoughtfulness. Yeah, he said after a moment. You're right. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just the waves, the distant sounds of the city behind us. Then after a while he said, You ever get lonely, Mom? I glanced at him, surprised. What makes you ask that? Jordan hesitated, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I don't know. Just thinking. I looked back at the water, considering. I guess sometimes, I admitted. But not in a sad way. Just, life moves fast. People come and go. Jordan nodded, but I could tell he had more on his mind. You don't ever think about dating again? I laughed softly. Oh, so now my son is trying to play matchmaker? I'm serious, he said, turning to face me. You're beautiful, you're smart. You could have anyone you wanted. I felt warmth creep up my neck at the sincerity in his voice. I waved a hand dismissively. I don't need all that. Why not? I took another sip, exhaling. Because I'm happy. I've got my work, my life. And I got you. Jordan held my gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. That's not the same thing, he murmured. I studied him for a moment, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his hands flexed in the sand. You know you're my favorite basketball player, right? I said, nudging his shoulder, trying to break the moment. That made him smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, I know. The night stretched on, and we let the conversation drift back to lighter things, music, basketball, the weird things people did at the gym. Eventually, I leaned back on my elbows, staring at the sky. All right, kid. I think we better head back before you start crying about the cold. Jordan scoffed, standing and offering me his hand. Please. We both know I could stay out here all night. I took his hand, letting him pull me up. You're getting old, Mom, he teased as I dusted sand off my jeans. Boy, I will leave you out here, I shot back. He laughed. throwing an arm around my shoulders as we made our way back up the beach. And as we walked, I felt it again. That unspoken thing between us. That understanding. That connection that had always set us apart from everyone else. Jordan and I, we were our own kind of family. And no one else had to understand it but us. The sound of the waves still lingered in my ears. Even though we had left the beach hours ago, Jordan had dropped me off at home before heading out with his friends. And now, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, I couldn't help but think about what he had said earlier. You don't ever think about dating again? It had been an innocent enough question, but the way he asked it, the way his voice had softened, had made me pause. He had always been protective of me, even as a little boy. When he was 6, he used to hold my hand in the grocery store and glare at any man who looked at me too long. By the time he was a teenager, he had become my unofficial bodyguard, quick to shut down any unwanted attention from strangers. Now at 22, he was still the same way, watchful, always making sure I was okay. I sighed, shaking my head at my own thoughts. I was fine. I had my work, my friends, my life. And I had Jordan. That was enough. The next morning, I woke up early for my shift at the clinic. Being a urologist wasn't always glamorous, but I loved my job. 10 years in a private practice had given me a steady stream of patients who trusted me. And I had built a reputation not just for being a good doctor, but for making people feel comfortable. That was important in my line of work, especially for men, who sometimes needed a little extra reassurance. By lunchtime, I had already seen a dozen patients, most of them regulars. Mr. Thompson, the retired Marine, came in complaining about the same old issue, but mostly just wanted to chat. A nervous college kid came in, convinced he had a serious condition, only for me to tell him it was nothing a little hydration and rest wouldn't fix. And then there were the businessmen, sharp suits, confident attitudes, until they had to sit across from me and talk about their health. That was when all the bravado melted away, and they became just like everyone else. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I got a text from Jordan. Jordan, hey, are you home? Me, still at work. What's up? Jordan, nothing. Just wondering when you'll be back. That was strange. Jordan was usually the one telling me he was too busy to come home early. Not the other way around. Me, late. Got a full schedule today. You good? There was a long pause before he responded. Jordan, yeah. I narrowed my eyes at my phone. Jordan never said just yeah when something was bothering him. I was still thinking about that text when I finally wrapped up for the evening. As I drove home, I tried to shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he had a fight with one of his friends. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. That wasn't unusual. Jordan came and went as he pleased, but the house was quiet when I stepped inside, which was rare. Usually, there was music playing from his room, or the sound of the TV from the living room. But tonight, nothing. Jordan, I called, setting my bag down. No answer. I made my way down the hall and stopped in front of the bathroom door. It was closed, and the water wasn't running, but I could hear movement inside. I knocked lightly. Hey, you good in there? A pause. Then his voice slightly strained. Yeah, I'm fine. I frowned. You've been in there for a while. There was another pause. Then finally, it's nothing, Mom. That was all I needed to hear to know it was definitely not nothing. Jordan wasn't the kind of guy to be shy about things, not with me. We talked about everything. Sometimes more than I needed to know. If he was acting weird, something was up. Jordan, I said, lowering my voice. I'm your mom. And I'm a doctor. If something's wrong, I'd rather you talk to me than sit in there all night pretending it's fine. Another long silence. Then finally the lock clicked, and the door opened just a little. Jordan didn't meet my eyes right away. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his jaw tight. You're gonna laugh at me, he muttered. I raised a brow. Have I ever laughed at you about something serious? Jordan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. I think something's wrong, he admitted. Like down there wrong. That was all I needed to hear. I slipped past him into the bathroom, my doctor instincts kicking in. Tell me what's going on, I said, keeping my voice steady, professional. Jordan looked uncomfortable, which wasn't like him at all. He was usually so confident, so self-assured. But now he looked almost embarrassed. It's been feeling weird all day, he said. Like not pain exactly, but he hesitated. I don't know. Different. I nodded. When did it start? He exhaled. This morning. After, you know. I sighed. Jordan, I'm your mother, not a mind reader. After what? He gave me a sheepish look. After I spent the night with someone. That wasn't surprising. Jordan was handsome, charming, and had more confidence than half the men twice his age. Women were drawn to him. I folded my arms. Protection? Of course, he said quickly. Any irritation? Burning? He shook his head. Just weird. I don't know how to explain it. I studied him for a moment. Come to the clinic tomorrow, I said. I'll run some tests just to be sure. Jordan groaned. Mom. Jordan, I said firmly. It's not a big deal. And if something's wrong, I'd rather you know now than wait until it gets worse. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. I smiled, squeezing his arm. It's probably nothing. But better safe than sorry, right? Jordan nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Yeah. Thanks, Mom. I smirked. See, that wasn't so bad. Jordan rolled his eyes. I knew you were gonna make me go to the clinic. Damn right, I said, ruffling his hair before walking out of the bathroom. And just like that, the easy rhythm between us was back. The tests were normal. All I needed was some cream for 5 days. When we got home, Jordan offered me a massage, saying he wanted to test out a technique he had learned on YouTube. I happily agreed. After a bath, the warmth of Jordan's hands lingered on my feet long after his fingers had left them. I wiggled my toes slightly, as if testing the space between us, as if ensuring that whatever had crackled in the air during his touch had dissipated. It hadn't. It still hummed beneath my skin, subtle but undeniable. He leaned back on the couch, stretching his arms behind his head, his biceps flexing slightly under the soft glow of the lamp. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I took another sip of my beer, hoping the cool bitterness would settle something in me. It didn't. Jordan sighed, a lazy, contented sound, his eyes half-lidded as he glanced at me. That was fun, he mused, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. We're terrible at bachata, though. I laughed, shaking my head. Speak for yourself. I think I was starting to get the hang of it. His eyebrows lifted. Oh yeah, so it wasn't you stepping all over my feet then? I nudged his thigh with mine playfully. Nope. That was definitely you. He chuckled, and the sound curled around me like a familiar song, warm and effortless. It was always like this with Jordan. Easy. Natural. And yet tonight, something felt different, like a shift in gravity, slight but impossible to ignore. Hey, he said after a beat, his voice softer now. You ever think about what life would have been like if things were different? I frowned slightly, turning to face him more fully. Different how? He shrugged, staring at the beer bottle in his hand, rolling it between his fingers. I don't know. Just different. If you weren't my mom. My breath hitched, but I masked it quickly, forcing a chuckle. You mean if I'd never had you? His head snapped up, his eyes searching mine. No, he said quickly, almost too quickly. I just mean, I don't know. If we had met in some other life. As different people. The air between us thickened. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, teased him the way I always did. But instead, I found myself staring at him, at the curve of his jaw, the way his fingers tapped idly against the glass bottle. I swallowed. That's a weird thing to think about, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Jordan exhaled a small laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, forget I said anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. The night stretched on, the beer dwindling, the laughter between us growing softer, more subdued. At some point Jordan stretched, his shirt lifting just slightly to reveal a sliver of his abdomen, before he pulled it back down. He caught me looking. Or maybe I only thought he did. Either way, neither of us said anything. Eventually exhaustion crept in. We sat in comfortable silence, the flickering light from the TV casting shadows against the walls. I should have told him to go to bed, should have stood up, stretched, put distance between us. But I didn't. Instead, he shifted closer, just enough for his thigh to brush against mine. A casual touch, a nothing touch. And yet, my breath felt trapped in my chest. I turned my head slightly, finding his gaze already on me. The room felt too quiet. The beer too warm. The space between us too small. "Jordan," I murmured, not even knowing what I was about to say. He smiled, then a slow, knowing thing. "Yeah." I hesitated, searching for the right words. Something that would put whatever this was back into the neat little box it belonged in. But before I could speak, he reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I froze. It was such a simple gesture, something he'd done before without a second thought. But this time it lingered. His fingers, warm against my skin, barely brushing the curve of my cheek before pulling away. Something in my chest tightened. I forced a laugh, standing abruptly, grabbing the empty beer bottles. "All right, enough of this. Time for bed." Jordan smirked, leaning back against the couch watching me. "Yeah, guess so." But his eyes stayed on me as I walked away. And even when I turned the corner, I could still feel them, heavy and unreadable against my back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what I was walking away from, or what I was walking toward. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting slanted golden lines across my bedroom floor, as I stirred awake to the sound of Jordan's voice calling me. His tone was casual, relaxed, but there was something about it. Something just a little different, though I couldn't quite place it. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and padded toward the bathroom where he was waiting. He stood near the sink, shirtless, his body lean but strong, a reminder of how much he had grown. The boy who once clung to my side, who needed me to tie his shoes and cut his sandwiches into triangles, was now a man, tall and self-assured in ways that still caught me off guard. He grinned as I entered, tilting his head toward the tube of cream on the counter. "You said I should apply it twice a day, but I want to make sure I'm doing it right," he said, his voice easy light. I nodded, stepping closer, my professional instinct kicking in. It was second nature to me, explaining things, teaching patients how to care for themselves. Jordan, despite being my son, was no different in this moment. Just another person in need of guidance. As I demonstrated, keeping my voice clinical, detached, I noticed how attentively he watched, how his brows furrowed in concentration, the way his lips quirked into a small, lopsided smile whenever I pointed out something obvious. "You always know how to help," he murmured as I finished, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror's reflection. "Thanks, Mom." There was a warmth in his gaze, a quiet appreciation that stirred something deep within me, something I couldn't name. I smiled back, ruffling his already messy hair out of habit. Though he barely reacted the way he used to as a kid, just chuckled softly. "You're not a kid anymore." I found myself saying, half to him, half to myself. He smirked, flexing slightly as if to prove a point. Nope. Not for a long time. And he wasn't. That realization settled in my chest as I stepped back, giving him space. The morning continued as usual, coffee brewing, toast popping from the toaster, the comfortable rhythm of our life together unfolding, as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Or maybe it had been shifting for a long time. So gradually I hadn't noticed until now. We sat at the kitchen table, the clinking of silverware, and the soft hum of the radio filling the space between us. Jordan scrolled through his phone lazily, one hand wrapped around his coffee mug, looking so at ease, so much like a man living his own life, yet still here, still part of mine in a way that felt closer than most sons were to their mothers. I watched him, wondering if he ever thought about these things, about how different we were from other families. If he ever noticed the way people looked at us when we laughed together in public, the way women his age sometimes eyed me with curiosity, perhaps trying to understand the bond between us. He caught me staring and raised a brow. "What?" I shook my head, sipping my coffee. "Nothing." He smirked but didn't push. That was Jordan. Always aware, always observant, but never one to pry unless he thought it mattered. We finished breakfast and went about our day, each lost in our own thoughts, yet still tethered in the way we always had been. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the house grew quiet again, we found ourselves back in our usual spot. On the couch, a movie playing, half watched, half forgotten as we talked over it, our voices weaving between scenes like an unscripted rhythm. He stretched out, his arm draping along the back of the couch, dangerously close to my shoulder, but not quite touching. It felt natural, effortless. And yet the weight of it, the warmth of his presence, sent a shiver through me that I hoped he didn't notice. You know, he said suddenly, his voice softer now, almost contemplative. I don't think I ever really thanked you. I turned to him confused. For what? He exhaled a small laugh, shaking his head. For everything. For always being here. For being you. There was something unspoken in his words. Something that made my pulse quicken for reasons I couldn't, or wouldn't fully understand. I forced a chuckle, trying to lighten the moment. Well, I didn't have much of a choice, did I? He grinned, but his eyes didn't leave mine. Maybe, but still. The space between us felt charged, the air heavier than it should have been. I turned back to the screen, feigning interest in the movie, hoping the moment would pass, hoping that whatever this was, this odd lingering tension, would dissolve back into the easy comfort we always had. But I felt his gaze on me for just a moment longer before he finally looked away. And I knew deep down that things had already changed. And there was no going back.